This is a trivial topic. You don't need to worry too much about it because this is typically not an transaction. It's an FI transaction. When I mean FI, I mean finance or FICO. So typically, your finance consultant will do this, not you, the consultant. So what are we doing here? We're trying to see how to pay the invoice that we have received. And typically you do it after a certain number of days, say 30 days or 45 days. And that is called as a payment term. Now, how do you do an outgoing payment, which is a payment that's sent out to the vendor against an invoice received from the vendor? You go to accounting, financial accounting, accounts payable, and then outgoing payment, right? So let's go there. Accounting. We're going to close the logistics section and open the accounting section. And open financial accounting, accounts payable, document entry, outgoing payment, then F53. Double click that. And over here, we have to enter a date, which is today's date. And of course, company code, USD, currency, blah, blah, blah. And then account. What's the account? This account represents a bank account. Basically, what you're doing is issuing a check. But instead of issuing a check, you just mention the bank account number and bank is automatically going to take care of the transaction. So there's an account number that we're going to use. And typically your FI consultant is going to give you that account number. You don't have to worry about that account number. And this account here represents the vendor 1222, right? That's the vendor that we have been using. So transaction code is F53 and this is the bank account number and this is the vendor account number. Okay, then hit enter. Now it shows two different line items. One is 400, another is 400. What it means is there are two open invoices that has to be processed for this vendor, each for $400. So you have to select which invoice we are trying to clear here, meaning which invoice we are trying to pay. In this case, both these items are activated. I know this because the color of these two are blue, right, as compared to these. Now I select this and click on this button, which will deactivate that line item. Now we're going to pay 400 and click on save. There you go. That's the document number that was posted. So let's recap what we have done in this video. We have received an invoice from the vendor, one or two of them. And now we're going to pay the vendor. So we have just received an invoice. So now we have paid the vendor. We have used the transaction code F-53, enter the bank account number, enter the amount that we wish to pay, and then enter the vendor. As soon as we entered the vendor, we got all the open invoices. We activated the invoice that we wanted to pay, and then saved the transaction, which effectively issues a check from the bank account that we own at the bank to the vendor. And the difference between the previous transactions and the current transaction is the goods receipt and invoice receipt were created with reference to a purchase order. But a vendor payment is not created with reference to the purchase order. This is not the case. It's created with reference to an accounting document created after you posted an invoice receipt. So invoice receipt posts an accounting document and vendor payment is done with reference to the accounting document. So this is the bare bones procure to pay cycle. There are 4 transactions in the procure to pay cycle. Purchase order, which is a notification to the vendor to supply goods. And when the vendor supplies the goods after a certain amount of time, we create a goods receipt in the system. And after a certain amount of time, the vendor also sends us an invoice, and we document it as an invoice receipt in the system. And finally, when we are ready to pay the vendor, we issue payment to the vendor. These four transactions constitute the bare bones P2P cycle, or procure to pay, P2P. All right, so let's do an exercise now. So what is the transaction code to create a vendor payment? So these exercises are related to payments. And the second question is, do you have a reference to the PO or invoice to pay the vendor? Third question is the vendor payment accounting document recorded in PO history?